Captain Day One stared at the dying control panel and tried not to think about how cold space was. The HSS Horizon had been drifting for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks since the engines exploded. 3 weeks since their distress beacon started calling into the empty dark, hoping someone would hear. Nobody heard. Day One walked through the dim corridors of his ship. The lights flickered. Life support was failing. He could see his breath in the air now. 47 people depended on him. 47 scientists and explorers who had trusted him to keep them safe. He was failing them. In the medical bay, Dr. Hayen lay on a bed, her breathing shallow. She had been hurt badly when the secondary systems failed. The human medical equipment could only do so much. Without proper treatment, she would die within days, maybe hours. Day One sat beside her bed. His chief scientist had become his friend over the years. They had explored 3 new star systems together. They had named planets. They had discovered things no human had ever seen. Now she was dying and he could do nothing. The crew had started recording final messages yesterday. Messages to families they would never see again. Messages that would drift forever in this unnamed system, unless someone found their frozen ship centuries from now. Humanity was young among the stars. They had only been exploring deep space for 50 years. They had met a few other species, but humans were considered primitive, backwards. Their ships were slow. Their technology was simple. Most of the galaxy ignored them. Now the horizon would become another statistic. Another failed expedition. Another reminder that space was vast and dangerous and did not care about courage or dreams. On the 22nd day, the sensors picked up something. A ship was approaching. Day One rushed to the bridge. His hands shook as he checked the readings. Yes, definitely a ship, but not human. The design was unfamiliar. Hope and fear mixed in his chest. Maybe this ship would help, or maybe they would see the crippled human vessel as easy salvage. Pirates existed among the stars just like they had on ancient Earth oceans. The alien ship came closer. It was smaller than the horizon, sleek and elegant where human ships were blocky and practical. A message came through. The translation software struggled with the language but managed to convert it. It said, "We received your distress call. Do you need help?" Day One almost cried. Instead, he sent back a simple message, "Yes, please. We are dying." The alien ship docked with the horizon. Day One watched on the monitors as the airlock opened. The aliens that came through were called Velari. They stood about as tall as humans but were thinner. Their skin had a slight blue tint. Their eyes were large and kind. The leader introduced himself as Elder Sivan. Through the translation devices, he explained that the Velari were merchants and scholars. They traveled the trade routes between systems. They had picked up the human distress signal by chance. Sivan looked around the dying ship. He saw the frozen corridors. He saw the frightened faces of the crew. He saw Dr. Hayen barely breathing in the medical bay. His expression showed sadness. His crew argued with him in their own language. Day One could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Some of the Velari were afraid. Others were suspicious. Helping unknown aliens was dangerous. Humans were strangers. They could be violent. They could be ungrateful. But Sivan made a decision. He turned to Day One and spoke through the translator. "We will help you. Please let our doctors see you're injured." What followed was a miracle. The Velari medical technology was far beyond what humans had. Their physicians worked on Dr. Hayen for hours. They used devices that looked like magic. Slowly, her breathing steadied. Her color returned. She would live. The Velari treated all the injured crew members. They shared their food and water. They repaired the Horizon life support systems using their own spare parts. They even helped fix the engines, giving away technology that must have been valuable. For 2 weeks, the Velari worked alongside the human crew. At first, there was awkwardness. The species were so different. But slowly, friendships formed. Dr. Hayen spent long hours with a Velari scientist named Quillan. They could barely speak to each other at first, but science was a universal language. They shared research. They drew diagrams. They laughed at the same jokes about equations. Day One and Sivan talked late into the nights. The Velari elder told stories of the galaxy. He described ancient civilizations and beautiful nebulas and dangerous warlords. He spoke of the Galactic Coalition, the alliance of powerful species that controlled most of known space. The Velari were not members of the coalition leadership. They were a minor species, peaceful traders. They had little power and few allies. They survived by being useful and staying out of conflicts. Day1 asked why Sivan had stopped to help humans. It was risky. It was expensive. The Valari gained nothing from it. Sivan looked at him with those large, gentle eyes. Because it was right, he said simply. Your people were dying. We had the ability to help. What else matters? Finally, the horizon was repaired enough to fly. The Valari would guide them to the nearest inhabited system. From there, the humans could find their way home. Before they parted ways, Day1 called his entire crew together. They gathered everything valuable the horizon carried. Research data, mineral samples, even personal items. They offered it all to the Valari as payment. Sivan refused. He shook his head gently. Compassion is not a transaction, he said through the translator. We did not help you for payment. We helped you because you needed help. But Day1 insisted on giving something. Please, he said, let us offer you something in return. What can we give you? The Valari elder thought for a long moment. Then he smiled. Remember us, he said. If your species grows strong among the stars, remember that once, strangers showed you kindness when you had nothing to give. Remember and perhaps someday show that same kindness to others. Day1 stood straight. He placed his hand over his heart in a human gesture of oath. I swear it, he said. Humanity will remember. If the Valari ever need help, we will come. No matter how far, no matter the cost. This debt will be repaid. The Valari smiled at this promise. They had heard many species make grand promises over the centuries. Few kept them once they gained power. Gratitude faded quickly in the cold politics of the galaxy, but they appreciated the sentiment. They did not believe humans would remember decades from now, let alone centuries, but it was kind of them to say. Dr. Hayan hugged Quillan goodbye. The two scientists had become true friends. They promised to send messages to each other, to share their discoveries. Quillan gave Hayan a small crystal from her homeworld. Hayan gave Quillan a picture of Earth. The ships parted. The horizon limped toward home, guided by Valari navigation charts. The Valari merchant ship continued on its trade route, carrying stories of the desperate humans they had rescued. When the horizon finally reached human space, the crew was celebrated. They had survived against impossible odds. They brought back tales of the first aliens who had shown humanity genuine kindness. Day1 filed detailed reports. He described everything about the Valari, their compassion, their technology, their culture. He made sure every word of his promise was recorded in official logs. On Earth, a monument was built. It showed a human and a Valari reaching toward each other across the stars. The inscription read, "They saved us when we had nothing to offer. We will never forget." But to the rest of the galaxy, the incident barely registered. Two minor species had a brief encounter. So what? The powerful civilizations of the coalition had more important things to worry about. Wars to fight, trade disputes to resolve, ancient grudges to maintain. The rescue of the horizon was just a footnote, a tiny moment in the vast history of the galaxy. Nobody imagined it would matter 300 years later. Nobody imagined it would change everything. 300 years had passed since the rescue of the horizon. 300 years since the Valari showed compassion to dying humans. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed most of all. Earth and its colonies now spread across 50 star systems. Human ships were no longer primitive and slow. They were fast, powerful, and feared. Human marines were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. Human engineers designed weapons that made older civilizations nervous. Humanity had fought wars. They had won some and lost others. They had earned respect through strength. The galaxy no longer dismissed them as backwards newcomers. Now humans were players in galactic politics. Now they mattered, but humans had not forgotten their history. In every human school, children learned about the horizon. They learned about Captain Day1 and his promise. They learned about Elder Sivan and Valari compassion. The story was taught alongside mathematics and literature as something fundamental about human identity. At the Human Naval Academy, every cadet read Day1's logs. They studied how the Valari had risked everything to save strangers. The lesson was clear. Remember who helped you when you were weak. Honor your debts. The monument on Earth had become a sacred site. Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, ceremonies were held. Veterans and civilians gathered to honor the memory of that small merchant ship, and its compassionate crew. Admiral Jiwoo stood at that monument one morning, her hand touching the cold stone. She was the commander of the human defense fleet now, the most powerful military force humanity had ever created. Her ships could crush planets. Her marines were legendary. But she remembered her great-grandmother's stories. The old woman had been just a junior engineer on the horizon. She had been 23 years old when the engines exploded. She had recorded her final message, certain she would die. Then the Valari came. Jiwoo's great-grandmother had lived to be 97. She told the story of the rescue to anyone who would listen. She made sure her family never forgot, made sure they understood that debt transcended time. Now Jiwoo commanded 5,000 warships. She had fought pirates and warlords. She had defended human colonies from raiders. She had negotiated treaties with species far older than humanity. But she had never forgotten that story. The Valari, meanwhile, had barely changed. They were still peaceful merchants and scholars. They still traveled the trade routes. They remembered the humans fondly, but assumed the friendship had faded. 300 years was a long time. Species forgot. Priorities changed. Promises made in gratitude rarely survived the cold reality of power. Then the Croxian Empire arrived. The Croxians were brutal conquerors. They built their empire through violence and slavery. They saw weakness and took advantage. They saw resources and took them. They respected only strength. Warlord Hexar led the Croxian expansion fleet, 3,000 warships under his command. He looked at the Valari systems and saw easy prey, 7 planets rich in rare minerals. Defended by outdated weapons and a tiny fleet, the Valari could muster only 200 ships for defense. Most were converted merchant vessels. They had no chance against the Croxian armada. The first battle lasted 3 hours. 50 Valari ships were destroyed. Thousands died. The survivors retreated to their homeworld, Valar Prime. Hexar's forces followed. They began a siege. Counselor Nerith was the Valari leader. He was descended from Elder Sivan's family. He had grown up hearing stories about the humans his ancestor had saved. But that was ancient history. Surely humans had more important concerns now. Still, desperation drove him to send messages. First to the Galactic Coalition, the powerful species who claimed to maintain order and peace. The response came quickly. It was polite but firm. The Coalition could not spare resources for the Valari situation. They had their own problems. The Croxians were not Coalition members, so technically this was not their concern. The real meaning was clear. You are not worth saving. Nerith sent messages to other species they traded with. Former partners. Civilizations they had done business with for centuries. The responses were sympathetic but useless. Everyone was very sorry. Nobody would help. It was too risky. The Croxians were too strong. The Valari had nothing to offer in return. As a final desperate act, Nerith sent a message to human space. He did not expect a response. 300 years was forever. But his ancestor had believed in those humans. Maybe that faith was worth one last try. The message arrived at human diplomatic offices. At first, it was just another request for aid among hundreds. But a young analyst named Tai Yang was reading the daily reports. He saw the species name Valari. His training kicked in immediately. Every human in the military knew that name. Every human understood what it meant. Tai Yang sent the message up the chain of command with the highest priority flag. Within an hour, it reached Admiral Jiwoo's desk. She read it once, then again, then a third time. The Valari were dying. The species that had saved humanity when humans were nothing. The species that had asked for nothing in return except to be remembered. Jiwoo stood and walked to her window. Outside, the massive fleet floated in formation. 5,000 warships, the pride of humanity, built over 3 centuries of innovation and determination. She thought about her great-grandmother, about the promise Captain Day One had made, about the monument on Earth where she had stood just days ago. She requested an emergency session with the Human Council, the civilian leadership that governed human space. She needed authorization to commit the entire fleet. This would not be a small operation. The council met within hours. Jiwoo presented the situation. The Valari were facing extinction. The galaxy had abandoned them. Only humanity could save them now. But it would be expensive, dangerous, politically complicated. Some council members argued against intervention. The Valari were not strategic assets. Humanity had treaties to consider. The Croxians might become enemies. Was it worth risking human lives for a species that offered nothing in return? Admiral Jiwoo listened to these arguments. Then she spoke. She told the story of the horizon. She reminded them of the promise. She explained that this moment would define humanity for the next 1,000 years. Are we a species that honors our debts? She asked. Or are we a species that calculates profit and loss? Are we humans because of what we build? Or because of what we choose to be? The vote was called. It took less than 5 minutes. The decision was unanimous. The human defense fleet would deploy immediately. All of it, every ship, every marine, every resource. When the decision was announced publicly, human worlds erupted in support. Millions volunteered. Resources poured in. This was not just a military operation. This was humanity living up to its promise. Ambassador Kreth represented the Galactic Coalition species. He could not believe what he was hearing. Humanity was committing their entire fleet to defend the Valari over a 300-year-old act of charity? It was insane. It was economically irrational. It was politically foolish. He met with Jiwoo personally. He tried to explain reality to her. The Croxians were powerful. The Valari were already lost. Humanity would waste resources and gain nothing. They would make enemies for no strategic benefit. This violated every principle of rational galactic politics. Jiwoo looked at him calmly. We are not going to save the Valari for strategic benefit, she said. We are going to save them because they saved us. Because we promised we would. Because that is who humans are. But it makes no sense, Kreth protested. You gain nothing, we gain everything, Jiwoo replied. We gain the knowledge that humanity keeps its word. That is worth more than any territory or treaty. She dismissed him and began preparations. The fleet would launch in 3 days. Every captain received detailed orders. Every Marine was briefed on the mission. This was not a conquest. This was a rescue. This was a debt being repaid. In Valari space, Counselor Nerith received the human response. At first he thought it was a mistake. Then he thought it was a joke. Then he realized it was real. Humanity was coming. The entire human fleet was coming. Beside him stood scientist Quillan. She was ancient now, over 400 years old. The last survivor of the crew that had rescued the horizon. She had never expected to see this day. Had never truly believed humans would remember, but they had. 300 years later, humanity remembered. They were coming to repay a debt that any other species would have forgotten. Quillan wept. They remembered, she whispered. After all this time, they remembered. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the human fleet launched. 5,000 warships leaving human space, heading toward a battle that offered no benefit. All because of a promise made 3 centuries ago. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Nobody understood why humanity would do this, but they were about to learn what it meant when humans made a promise. The mobilization happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 48 hours, 5,000 human warships had assembled at the staging point. The largest fleet humanity had ever gathered. Admiral Jiwoo stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Remembrance. The ship was named in honor of the promise Captain Daewon had made 3 centuries ago. It was fitting that this vessel would lead the rescue. Beside her stood Commander Tae Yang, the young analyst who had first flagged the Valari message. He had been promoted immediately and assigned as her tactical officer. He was brilliant at strategy, able to see patterns others missed. Also on board was Lieutenant Bo-Ra, commander of the elite fighter squadron. She was only 25, but already legendary among pilots, and she had personal reasons for this mission. Her great-great-great-grandmother had been the navigation officer on the horizon. The promise was in her blood. The entire human civilization watched as the fleet prepared to launch. Schools closed. Businesses shut down. Everyone wanted to see this moment. This was not just a military operation. This was humanity proving what it stood for. Jiwoo gave a brief speech before departure. It was broadcast across all human worlds. She kept it simple. 300 years ago, strangers saved our people when they were dying. They asked for nothing except that we remember. Today, those strangers need help. We go to repay our debt. We go to show the galaxy what humanity means by honor. The fleet launched. 5,000 ships entering hyperspace simultaneously. The energy signature was visible from neighboring systems. The galaxy took notice. The journey to Volari space would take 2 weeks through the hyperlane networks. 2 weeks while the Volari held out against impossible odds. 2 weeks while the galaxy watched and wondered if humans were brave or stupid. During the transit, intelligence reports arrived constantly. The situation was getting worse. The Croxians had conquered 4 of 7 Volari colonies. Millions were dead. Velar Prime, the homeworld, was under heavy siege. Civilian cities were being bombed. Warlord Hexar was tightening the noose. He had 3,000 ships surrounding the planet. His ground forces were preparing for final assault. He expected victory within days. Commander Taeyang studied the tactical data obsessively. He ran simulations constantly. The Croxian position was strong. They held the high ground around the planet. They had supply lines established. They outnumbered the human fleet 3-2 when accounting for defensive advantages. A conventional battle would be bloody. Humans might win, but the casualties would be terrible. Thousands of ships destroyed, tens of thousands of Marines dead, and the Volari might not survive the crossfire. Taeyang needed something better, something unexpected. He worked for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, running scenarios through the tactical computers. Finally, he found it, a strategy that nobody would expect, a plan that required perfect timing and absolute coordination. He presented it to Admiral Jiwoo. She listened carefully as he explained the 3-phase operation. Her expression did not change as he described the risks. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Will it save the Volari?" "Yes," Taeyang replied. "If it works, we will save them with minimal casualties on both sides." "Then we do it," Jiwoo said. "Prepare the fleet." Messages began transmitting across the fleet. Every captain received detailed instructions. Every ship was assigned a specific role. The plan was complex, requiring thousands of vessels to act in perfect harmony. But human military discipline was legendary. They would make it work. Lieutenant Bora briefed her fighter pilots. 300 of the best combat flyers in human space. Their role was critical to the plan. They would lead the first strike. They needed to be perfect. The pilots listened intently. Many were young, but all were volunteers. They knew the risks. They knew that some would not return. But they also knew why they were here. The Volari had saved humanity once. Now it was humanity's turn. On day 9 of the journey, the human fleet made contact with what remained of Volari command. The connection was encrypted and routed through multiple relays to avoid Croxian detection. Counselor Nerith appeared on the screen. He looked exhausted. His city had been bombed for weeks. His people were dying, but when he saw Admiral Jiwoo, hope returned to his eyes. "You came," he said simply. "I did not believe you would, but you came." "We made a promise," Jiwoo replied. "Humanity does not forget. Your ancestors saved our people when we were strangers. Now we save yours." Beside Nerith stood scientist Quillan. She was the last survivor of the Whisper Wind crew. At 423 years old, she had lived to see this impossible moment. She could barely speak through her tears. "I was there," she whispered. "I helped repair your ship. I met Dr. Heian. We thought you would forget. Everyone forgets. But you remembered. 300 years and you remembered." Jiwoo smiled gently. "We teach our children your story. Every human knows what the Volari did for us. You are part of who we are." The tactical briefing followed. Taeyang explained the battle plan. The Volari would need to hold out for 3 more days. Then the human fleet would arrive. The Croxians would face something they had never encountered before. "Can you hold 3 days?" Jiwoo asked. Nerith looked at his people behind him. Tired, wounded, but not broken. "We will hold," he promised. "We will hold because you are coming." The transmission ended. The countdown began. 3 days until the human fleet arrived. 3 days until the galaxy learned what it meant when humans kept their promises. Meanwhile, Warlord Hexar received his own intelligence reports. A human fleet was approaching. 5,000 ships. It was impressive, he had to admit, but ultimately irrelevant. His forces held superior positions. They were dug in around the planet with overlapping fields of fire. They had supply lines and reinforcements ready. The humans might have numbers, but the Croxians had the advantage of defense. More importantly, Hexar believed he understood humans. They were aggressive, direct. They favored frontal assaults and overwhelming firepower. He had studied their previous battles. They were brave but predictable. He prepared his defenses accordingly, concentrated his forces at the likely approach vectors. set up kill zones, prepared his troops for a slugging match. The humans would come in hard and fast. His forces would bleed them. Eventually, the humans would realize the cost was too high and retreat. Hexar sent a message to the approaching human fleet. It was a standard demand. Turn back, this is not your war. The Valari are defeated. Your intervention only prolongs suffering. Spare yourselves unnecessary casualties. Leave now, and the Croxian Empire will forget this intrusion. Admiral Jiwoo received the message. She read it once and deleted it without responding. Her silence said more than any threat could. That silence unsettled Hexar more than he wanted to admit. He expected bravado, threats, demands, but the humans said nothing. They just kept coming. On the final night before arrival, Jiwoo walked through the remembrance. She visited the crew quarters, talked to Marines preparing their equipment, checked in with pilots running final simulations. These people were putting their lives at risk for aliens most of them had never met, but they did not hesitate. They understood what this mission meant. This was about more than tactics or territory. This was about proving that humanity was different, that some species kept their word no matter the cost. In her quarters, Jiwoo looked at the replica medal from Captain Daewon. The original was in a museum on Earth, but she carried a copy, a reminder of the promise that had started this all. Tomorrow they would arrive. Tomorrow the battle would begin. Tomorrow the galaxy would see what happened when someone threatened the friends of humanity. Jiwoo did not sleep that night. None of the fleet did. They were too close now, too focused. In a few hours they would drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valari system. Commander Tae Yang made final adjustments to the plan. Every variable accounted for. Every ship knew its role. The timing would be perfect. Lieutenant Bora sat in her fighter cockpit running through pre-flight checks. Her squadron was ready. They had trained for this. They would not fail. On Valar Prime, Counselor Nerith stood on the walls of his besieged city. His people gathered behind him. They looked to the sky, waiting. The Croxians had promised a final assault at dawn, but the humans had promised to arrive before then. Quellan stood beside him, her ancient eyes fixed on the stars. She had lived long enough to see many impossible things, but this was the most impossible of all. A promise kept across 3 centuries, a debt repaid when everyone said debts expired. The night grew darker. Then just before dawn, the sky lit up. 5,000 ships emerged from hyperspace. The human fleet had arrived. The Battle of Valar Prime was about to begin. The news reached every corner of the galaxy within days. The Battle of Valar Prime became the most analyzed military engagement in recent history. Tactical experts studied the recordings obsessively. They could not believe what they were seeing. A 5,000-ship fleet deployed to defend a species with no strategic value. A brilliant 3-phase attack that turned superior enemy positions into a death trap. Perfect coordination across thousands of vessels, and all of it based on a 300-year-old promise. Ambassador Kreth filed his report to the Galactic Coalition Council. His words were carefully chosen, but his conclusion was stark. Humanity must be reevaluated. They are not merely another military power. They are fundamentally unpredictable because they operate on principles we do not share. The coalition leadership read his report in silence. For centuries, they had dismissed humans as aggressive but manageable. Now they realized their error. Humans were dangerous not because of their weapons, but because of their values. They kept promises no rational species would honor. They protected allies no strategic analysis would recommend defending. This made them impossible to predict, impossible to manipulate, and impossible to ignore. On Valar Prime, the reconstruction was happening faster than anyone expected. Human engineers worked alongside Valari workers. They rebuilt cities, repaired infrastructure, established new systems, but they did it as partners, not conquerors. The formal alliance was signed 6 months after the battle. The ceremony took place aboard a replica of the Whisperwind. Humans had built it as a gift to the Valari people, an exact recreation of the merchant ship that had saved the horizon 3 centuries ago. Admiral Jiwoo and Counselor Nerith signed the documents together. But this was not a normal alliance. It was not based on trade agreements or military necessity. It was built on mutual respect and the shared belief that some bonds transcended calculation. They named it the Compact of Remembered Compassion. The words were chosen carefully. This alliance existed because one species had shown compassion, and another had remembered. Scientist Quillan attended the ceremony. She was over 420 years old now. Her health was failing, but she insisted on being present for this moment. She had lived long enough to see the impossible, to see kindness repaid across centuries. She gave a speech that was broadcast across both human and Valari worlds. Her voice was weak, but her words were strong. 300 years ago, she said, my people made a choice. We could have ignored the dying humans. We could have protected ourselves. But Elder Sivan believed compassion was more important than safety. Today, we see the result of that choice. A simple act of kindness has echoed across 3 centuries. It saved our entire species. It changed the galaxy. This is the power of compassion. This is what happens when someone chooses to help instead of calculating the cost. Quillan died peacefully 2 weeks later. She passed in her sleep, surrounded by family. Her last words were about the humans. They remembered, she whispered. They remembered us. Her funeral was attended by representatives from both species. Admiral Jiwoo spoke at the ceremony. She described how Quillan had helped Dr. Heian recover, how the 2 scientists had become friends, how that friendship represented everything good about what could happen when species chose compassion over fear. The impact of the Battle of Valar Prime rippled through galactic politics. Dozens of species suddenly wanted alliances with humanity. They saw what humans had done for the Valari. They understood that having humanity as an ally meant something profound. But humans were selective. They remembered who had refused to help the Valari. They remembered which species had stood aside and watched. When the coalition powers who had abandoned the Valari now requested human partnerships, the answer was polite but firm. We value loyalty, the human diplomats explained. The Valari showed us loyalty 300 years ago. We show them loyalty now. If you want our friendship, prove you understand what loyalty means. This philosophy changed the galaxy. Suddenly, compassion and honor had strategic value. Suddenly, how you treated weaker species mattered, because humanity was watching, and humanity remembered. A monument was built on Valar Prime at the exact coordinates where the human fleet had first emerged. It showed 2 figures, a human in a military uniform and a Valari in traditional robes. Their hands were clasped together in friendship. The inscription was written in both languages. It read, "They showed us compassion when we had nothing. We showed them loyalty when they needed everything. This is the way of friends across the stars." Every year on the anniversary of the battle, ceremonies were held at the monument. Human naval cadets attended alongside Valari students. They learned the story together. They understood that this alliance was different from any other in galactic history. The story spread. Every species told different versions. Some emphasized the tactical brilliance of Commander Taeyang's strategy. Others focused on the courage of Lieutenant Bora's fighter pilots. A few embellished details until the story bordered on myth. But the core truth remained consistent. Humanity had crossed the galaxy to honor a 300-year-old debt. They had risked everything for friends with no strategic value. They had proven that some species operated on principles beyond cold calculation. In diplomatic negotiations across the galaxy, humans were now treated differently. When they made promises, people believed them. When they formed alliances, partners trusted them. Because everyone knew the story of what happened when someone helped humanity. Reputation became humanity's greatest weapon, more valuable than any fleet, more powerful than any technology. The galaxy learned that humans kept their word. That made them the most sought-after allies in known space. 50 years after the battle, Admiral Jiwoo retired. She was old now, but still sharp. She was asked to teach at the Naval Academy, to train the next generation of officers. She accepted. On her first day, she stood before a class of young cadets. Behind her, a holographic display showed the Battle of Valar Prime in tactical detail. Every move, every decision. The students had studied it for years. But Jiwoo wanted to give them something the databases could not. A cadet raised his hand. He was young and confident. "Admiral," he asked, "was it worth it? Risking so much for so little strategic gain?" Jiwoo smiled. She had been waiting for this question for 50 years. She looked at the young cadet and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "The Valari saved 47 humans when they had no reason to trust us. We saved billions of Valari because those 47 people remembered to be grateful. If you think that is not strategic value, you do not understand strategy. You only understand tactics." She gestured to the display showing the current state of the galaxy. The human sphere of influence had expanded dramatically. Dozens of species sought alliance with humanity. Former coalition powers had been sidelined. This is what compassion bought us. This is what loyalty earned us. We are not feared merely for our weapons. We are trusted because we keep our promises. That makes us more powerful than any fleet. That gives us influence no amount of military force could achieve. The cadets listened in silence. Some were beginning to understand. Others would need time. But they would all carry this lesson forward. They would all remember what made humanity different. In the archives of both human and Valari worlds, the original logs were carefully preserved. Captain Daywan's recordings from the horizon, Elder Sivan's reports from the Whisperwind, Dr. Hayen's research notes documenting her friendship with Quillan. Students and researchers studied them constantly, searching for insights into the encounter that changed galactic history, trying to understand how a simple act of kindness could echo across 3 centuries and reshape civilization. Captain Daywan's final entry, written as the horizon left Valari space all those centuries ago, contained words that proved prophetic. Today we were saved by strangers who became friends. They asked for nothing but that we remember. I cannot imagine a future where humanity forgets this debt. He continued, if we ever achieve greatness, it will be built on the foundation of this lesson. Compassion answered with loyalty. Kindness repaid with protection. This is who we must become. Humanity had become exactly what Daywan envisioned. A species known not just for strength but for honor. Not just for power but for loyalty. Not just for weapons but for keeping promises. The galaxy would never be the same. Other species began to reconsider their values. If compassion could be strategic, if loyalty could be powerful, if honor could change the balance of power, then perhaps the old ways of thinking were wrong. Some species began teaching the story of the horizon and the Whisperwind to their own children, not as history but as a lesson about what was possible when someone chose kindness over calculation. The legend grew. Centuries from now, people would still tell this story. They would still teach their children about the time when one species showed compassion and another remembered for 300 years, about the battle that should never have been fought and the alliance that should never have formed, but it did happen. Against all logic and expectation, it happened. Because 47 humans refused to forget the aliens who saved them. Because an entire civilization decided that some debts transcended time. Because humanity chose to be defined by honor rather than by power. The human fleet arrived exactly as predicted. 5,000 ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valari system. The energy signatures lit up every sensor in the area. The Croxians detected them immediately. Warlord Hexar watched the display with confidence. The humans were coming in exactly as he expected. They formed into battle lines, standard military formations, preparing for a frontal assault, just as his intelligence had predicted. 1,000 human capital ships began advancing toward the planet. Dreadnoughts and battlecruisers. Their weapons charged, their shields at maximum power. It looked like the classic human tactic. Overwhelming force applied directly. Hexar committed 2/3 of his fleet to meet them. 2,000 Croxian warships moved to intercept. They held the defensive positions around the planet. They had overlapping fields of fire. They were ready. The two forces met at the edge of the gravity well. Massive weapons lit up the void. Energy beams crossed the darkness. Missiles launched in waves. The battle was brutal and straightforward. Ship against ship. Strength against strength. Human shields absorbed tremendous damage. Croxian armor held against the assault. Both sides took casualties. Ships were destroyed. Thousands died. But neither side retreated. It was the kind of slugging match that wars were made of. Hexar watched with satisfaction. The humans were brave but predictable. His forces were holding. The battle was going according to his plan. Eventually, the humans would realize the cost was too high. They would retreat. The Valari would fall. Another easy conquest. What Hexar did not know was that the attacking fleet was mostly automated drones. Ships controlled remotely from the main human fleet. They fought well enough to be convincing. Their shields held because they carried minimal crew and maximum power. They were not meant to win. They were bait. While the Croxians were focused on the frontal assault, the real human fleet was moving. 4,000 warships using a navigation technique that should have been impossible. They approached from an unexpected vector, using the system neutron star to mask their signatures. Commander Tae Yang had calculated this maneuver down to the second. The gravitational forces around a neutron star were immense. One mistake would crush the entire fleet. But human pilots were skilled. Human computers were precise. They threaded the needle perfectly. They emerged behind the Croxian fleet with complete tactical surprise. Lieutenant Bora led her fighter squadron in the first wave. 300 of the best pilots in human space. Their targets were carefully selected. Supply ships, command vessels, communication arrays. The critical infrastructure that held the Croxian fleet together. The fighters moved like a swarm. Fast and coordinated. Croxian interceptors tried to respond, but they were caught completely off guard. Human pilots were smaller and more maneuverable. They struck with surgical precision. Bora destroyed 3 supply ships in the first minute. Her squadron followed her lead. Explosions bloomed across the Croxian rear formations. The carefully organized defensive position began to collapse. Warlord Hexar realized too late what had happened. The frontal assault was a distraction. The real attack came from behind. His fleet was split. His supply lines were cut. His command structure was breaking down. He tried to reorganize, tried to pull forces back, but the human coordination was too swift. Admiral Jiwoo watched from the remembrance as her plan unfolded perfectly. Every ship knew its role. Every captain executed with precision. The third phase began. The decoy fleet, having served its purpose, stopped retreating. It turned and stood firm. The Croxian forces that had been pursuing suddenly found themselves trapped. In front of them, the human decoy fleet. Behind them, the main human armada. The Croxians were compressed into a killing zone, caught between 2 forces with nowhere to run. Human numerical superiority suddenly mattered. 5,000 ships against 3,000. But more importantly, the Croxians had lost their defensive advantage. They were scattered and confused. Their formations broken. Their communications disrupted. The battle became a rout. Croxian ships tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Some fought to the end. Others surrendered. Many were destroyed trying to escape. Hexar's flagship took critical damage. His shields failed. His engines died. Human Marines launched boarding pods. They breached the hull and fought through the corridors. The Croxian crew surrendered within minutes. Warlord Hexar was captured alive. The conqueror who had never known defeat. The warrior who had crushed dozens of species. He kneeled before human Marines, his confidence shattered by an enemy he had completely underestimated. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Croxian invasion fleet was destroyed. 2,000 ships captured or destroyed. The survivors fled in disorder. The siege of Villar Prime was broken. On the planet's surface, the Villari could hardly believe what they were seeing. The Croxian bombardment had stopped. The enemy fleet was retreating. And in the sky above, human ships took up protective positions. Counselor Nerith collapsed in relief. His people cheered. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived because humanity remembered. But the human fleet did not stop with the space battle. They moved immediately to liberate the conquered Villari colonies. 4 worlds still under Croxian occupation. 4 worlds where Villari civilians suffered under brutal rule. Human Marines were experts at urban warfare. They had trained for decades in planetary assault tactics. They dropped from orbit with precision, struck at command centers, freed prisoners, protected civilians. The liberation happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 3 days, all 4 colonies were free. Croxian occupation forces surrendered or were destroyed. Villari civilians emerged from hiding to find human soldiers offering food and medical care. Human medical ships established orbit around Villar Prime. They began treating millions of wounded. Engineering crews descended to repair critical infrastructure. Power plants, water systems, communications networks. The transformation from war zone to relief operation was seamless. Admiral Jiwoo personally led a delegation to the surface. She wanted to meet the Villari leadership face to face, to see with her own eyes the people her ancestors had promised to protect. She walked through the ruins of the capital city. Buildings destroyed by bombardment, streets scarred by war. But the people were alive. The Villari had survived. Counselor Nerith met her at the government center. He was exhausted, covered in dust from the destroyed buildings. But his eyes were clear and grateful. Beside him stood Quillan. the ancient scientist who had helped rescue the Horizon 3 centuries ago. She was weak from age and the stress of the siege, but she insisted on being there for this moment. Jiwoo approached them. She removed her admiral hat and bowed deeply, a gesture of respect. "We are sorry we could not arrive sooner," she said, "but we came as fast as we could. The debt is repaid." Quelan stepped forward. Her hands shook as she reached out. Jiwoo took them gently. The ancient Valari looked into the admiral's eyes and spoke. 300 years ago, she said, we saved 47 humans. We did not expect anything in return. We did not believe they would remember. But today you saved billions of Valari. You crossed the galaxy. You risked everything. The debt is more than repaid. It is transformed into something greater. Jiwoo shook her head gently. "There is no debt anymore," she replied. "There is only friendship. Your ancestors showed compassion to strangers. That compassion created a bond that cannot be broken by time or distance. We did not come here to repay a debt. We came here because the Valari are our friends, and humanity protects its friends." Quelan wept. Nerith wept. Around them, Valari civilians who had gathered to watch this meeting wept. And the human soldiers who stood nearby felt something profound. They had done more than win a battle. They had proven what their species stood for. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. The story was incredible. 5,000 human ships had traveled across space to rescue a minor species. They had defeated a superior force through brilliant tactics. They had liberated occupied worlds, all because of a 300-year-old promise. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Species did not keep promises for 3 centuries. Species did not risk everything for friends with no strategic value. Species did not fight wars based on honor and compassion. But humans did, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. In his cell aboard a human prison ship, Warlord Hexar finally understood his mistake. He had assumed humans were like every other species, motivated by profit and power, predictable in their selfishness. But humans were different. They valued things he could not understand, things that made them dangerous in ways he had never imagined. They kept promises. They honored debts. They protected the weak. He had lost not because his ships were weaker. He had lost because he could not comprehend an enemy who fought for something beyond conquest. The Battle of Valar Prime was over. But its consequences were just beginning.